Joining us to discuss is the economics editor at the Australian Adam Creighton. Adam, good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. This coronavirus is spreading and it's causing a whole bunch of problems with it. And now, economically, it's not just the world that it's going to suffer. Well, it is, but we're going to be caught up in that as well. How significant is that? And I mean, how much in the way of losses do you think Australia could experience?
Yeah, well, certainly, as you say, Australia would certainly be one of the most exposed countries to China. So on the tourism front, Chinese tourists spend $12 billion a year here, and then Chinese students spend a further $10 billion, and that's an enormous figure. I mean, just to give you an idea, our total gas exports last year were $50 billion, so it's about half is just basically Chinese tourism and education exports. Now, of course, not all of that is going to dry up, but certainly some of it will, and I think most experts are currently saying that kind of losses in the hundreds of millions maybe are certainly possible this year. That's if we see the continuation of the current trajectory, if you like, for a couple of months. I mean, on a more positive side, I think what we can say so far with this virus is it's certainly nowhere near as deadly as the SARS virus was back in 2003, and that's just in terms of, if you look at the ratio of the number of people who've died to the number of people infected, it's about 3% at the moment for this virus, and it was about 12% for SARS back in 2003. So that's moderately heartening, I guess, but still a serious situation.
Yeah, look, I've got to ask, it kind of pales in significance when you look at what's going on with the bushfire crisis and the coronavirus as well, but the budget surplus, this is just another thing that Josh Frydenberg has to deal with, doesn't he? Do you still think he's managing expectations, Adam?
No, look, I still think he is managing expectations. Look, I think the impact on the Australian economy of the coronavirus will be smaller than the bushfires, but that said, I take your point. It is yet another factor that's going to slow the economy to some extent, and that will, of course, have an effect on federal government coffers. But I still think the buffer in there from commodity prices will see the government through, and it'll get to a $5 billion roughly surplus this year. That said, it's worth pointing out that commodity prices have fallen a bit in the wake of this virus scare, and that is, of course, because people fear the impact on consumer demand in China, and of course the flow-on effect on what that means for construction in terms of iron ore usage, etc. So look, it's still early days, but on the balance of probabilities, I still think there'll be a surplus this financial year.
Just on the economic impact of the coronavirus, Adam, is it as significant in other countries as well? I mean, how much of a hit do you think the US could take? Obviously, China's still a huge trading partner. A lot of Chinese people go into the US to study, also to the UK, also to the Europe. So is it as significant in your opinion?
Well, look, assuming it's limited to 1 or 2 deaths, of course, that's obviously a tragedy for those families. But from the perspective of the entire economy, I think it'll be a very limited impact on the US and Europe. I mean, I think these viruses obviously are very scary, and they certainly capture the imagination. It's not so much the deaths; it's the fear of dying that is the real cause of damage around the world. And I think it does have somewhat semi-permanent effects on the desire to travel to China, to travel. So I mean, it's a permanent weight on the tourism industry, if you like. But I just don't think it's going to have serious serious economic impacts on the world.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll definitely keeping across it. Just quickly, markets when they open locally, 10 a.m. our time. Are you expecting similar falls, or will you just see that kind of fade away?
Yeah, certainly futures prices are pointing to a 1.2% fall, which I think is a little bit less than what we saw in the US yesterday. But nevertheless, that's a sizable fall for the Australian market, 1.2%. But that said, even if it does fall 1.2%, it's still almost at a record high, the Australian market. And you can say the same thing about the US market and European markets too. So I think the valuations are still very high, very buoyed, and that is partly built on expectations of a positive future earnings. So for the time being, I think we don't need to worry too much from an economic point of view.
Adam, just quickly, your argument in the paper today about gas reservation.
Yes,
can you give us just a quick summary of what you think is going on there?
Well, look, I was just somewhat heartened by the Resource Minister, Matt Canavan, coming out and saying that he's thinking about that we might need some sort of gas reservation policy in the eastern states. I mean, he was talking specifically, I think, about new gas in the Northern Territory should be restricted to the Northern Territory to develop some sort of manufacturing hub up there. But I think more generally we have a serious problem in this country where we are paying more for gas than countries that have no gas. So this is a very odd situation. I mean, the price has basically tripled in Australia over the past 15 years, and it's more, say, now than in Japan or Korea, and yet we export our gas to those markets. So I just think Australians really should be benefiting more from having so much gas in their own country, but they don't seem to be. And I think it is partly because it's all being exported for a higher price and there's no pressure for it to be sold here.
Sure, there's been such a reluctance though, hasn't there, Adam, to have a gas reservation policy. I think, you know, this government would regard it, seeing it as protectionist. So what has changed, do you think, in the last 6 months to a year?
Well, look, I just think the greater awareness that these high power prices are really hurting the economy. They're certainly hurting the manufacturing sector. A number of businesses have shut down factories in the East Coast, and certainly in Western Australia, which does have a reservation policy, 15% of gas there must actually stay in the state. That hasn't hurt investment in Western Australia, and also their prices there are actually lower than in the eastern states for gas. So there is some empirical evidence that these reservation policies work. And also, you know, let's face it, most countries have similar policies. Australia's unusual in not having a national reservation policy. So I think there's no harm in trying it at least. If it doesn't work, we can always get rid of it.
Yeah, all right. That's an article that's in today's Australian, written by Adam Creighton. Excellent as always. Adam, thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks so much, guys.